Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of wine trends and passionate people beyond the bottle. I'm Lauren Buzzio, the managing editor here at Wine Enthusiast. And in this episode, the first of a 4-part series featuring interviews with tastemakers honored in our annual 40 Under 40 list, we're talking about inclusivity. Associate Managing Editor Emily Saladino explores why wine has such an exclusive reputation in the US, despite its popularity, and how the wine world could become more accessible to more people. Joining Emily is Siobhan Ball, owner and founder of Dirty Radish Travel Company, and Zidanelia Archidiacono, Pinot Noir winemaker at Sonoma-Cutrer. Their perspectives and personal experiences help us answer some big-picture questions. How can wine ditch its sometimes snobby reputation and bring more people to the table?
I am lucky enough to be joined today by Siobhan Ball, the owner and founder of Dirty Radish Travel Company. Siobhan hosts wine-centric trips and experiences in 2 places where she has very deep connections, Oregon and Beaujolais, France. She is a certified sommelier and a French wine scholar. Siobhan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Emily, for having me.
I am excited to chat with you about something that I take very seriously, which is why does wine have such an exclusive reputation? Your company, Dirty Radish, hosts travel experiences in Oregon and France, and you also lived in Lyon for some time. How would you characterize attitudes toward wine in France versus the US?
It's such a big question just because you're talking about cultures, 2 different countries, and a lot of time in between when those 2 countries were in existence. So it's kind of like a really big question to ask, but to break that down into this sort of biteable or digestible way, I would say wine has been a part of the culture for France for a very long time. So they do have a different attitude towards wine and a different behavior in how they partake in it. But definitely it's a slower pace.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely with drinking, it's a slower pace. And it's something that complements a meal or enhances a meal. Whereas here, we're just getting into those types of feelings.
Yeah, no, it's true. I talk to friends who I grew up in the US, and I talk to friends who grew up in different parts of the world, and they will say exactly that. Like they grew up with their parents maybe pouring a glass with dinner, and that was just part of the meal. And I didn't grow up in a house with a lot of wine, but it is really interesting to think about like maybe that kind of rips the Band-Aid off, for lack of a more elegant comparison. Maybe that just makes you more accustomed to having it around.
Well, I think in France, you're talking about a fairly small country and a lot of wine. It's the number 1 producer of wine in the world. And well, Italy would probably argue, but well,
Another podcast.
at a minimum, you have France, Italy, and Spain all being the leaders in making wine. And so in that way, you can almost bet that somebody knows someone or someone has someone in their family in France that makes wine or has a deep connection to wine. Whereas in the US, it's just sort of these pockets as far as where the growing regions are and then how people consume things, whether that's just because of the cities or restaurants. But it's very different. So that's even right there another layer as to why it's a little bit more of something that's always been a part of their life in France as opposed to here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is really interesting. I do see it as being like there's sort of operational reasons why, and then there are these cultural reasons why. Like as you said, it's such a big question because it encompasses all of those things. In terms of the logistical is probably the right word instead of operational. Like in terms of the logistical challenges, like do you see those in the US, whether it's via the way our 3-tier system works or just our import export? Do you see that as playing into it?
Well, you have to think about you have to go kind of almost back to who's making the wine.
Mm-hmm.
What are the hands or who are the hands that are touching this wine as it comes through? So the people making those decisions are making those decisions, based on their palate, their education, their level of, like, if you start bringing diverse people into those spaces, you're going to see something different. But right now, it sort of has been what it has been for a very long time. And that creates the culture that we have around wine, which is going to be that there's a lot of sort of higher end wines coming in to start, which is why there's been that sort of like, oh, wine is this kind of place up in the sky that nobody can sort of understand. But so all those things sort of play into each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. It is really interesting, right? Like I loved the language you used about like it being this place on high. And I do actually think for some folks there is that feeling where it's like surrounded by clouds and like angels with harps are like outside of every wine estate. And while there certainly are some chateaus that are so stunning, like there's also places that are farms. You know, I think we sometimes forget that like anything, wine is an agricultural product.
Yes. I mean, there's this sort of kind of, you have to look at these two different things of, all humans are created equal. And so we all have this sort of right to that, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, if you will. But not all wines are created equally. So they should be treated the same. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to give, there's a lesson in people don't understanding that, like that these higher priced wines come from a very small pocket, a very small parcel, with a lot of work going into making that wine as opposed to something that's, you know, juice.
Right, right. Yeah, you know, you get what you pay for sometimes. Not always, but often.
Not always.
You get what
There are
you pay for.
definitely, of course, like very decently priced high-end wines, but understanding
Right.
the work that goes into that helps you understand why the wine cost what it cost in your glass. On the tours to France, people participate in the winemaking in some way.
Mhm.
They get to see it and be hands-on and touch it. And so it creates a different experience in that way. We went to Nicole Chanrion and she knew we were coming. She knew we were coming, but she was tying vines. And she put my whole group of folks to work tying vines. And there was one woman on the trip in particular who wasn't a huge wine fan, but came for the art and history portion, and her husband liked wine. And so she really drank that particular wine. she she wanted to taste that wine because she had been a part of the process, right? So
Right,
there's sort
right.
of that sort of, feeling of it too, because yes, it is an agriculture, and I think people don't sometimes get to see the farming part of winemaking.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that she was like, "This is my one. I gotta get a glass. I gotta get a couple glasses."
I
I love
worked. She's like, I worked for this one, so I'm gonna, and meeting this woman who's similar age to her, and they're, running around this vineyard tying. It feels good to be a part of the process, and then yeah, you want to drink it. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's funny, I once went on a tour. I was like one of your the equivalent of one of your guests. I went on a tour and I was in, like a cava vineyard in, Spain, and the woman giving the tour was like, "Oh, yeah, if you want to, like, this is where all of the wines are they're resting on lees, and, like, we pivot them, right, like 90 degrees once a week." I'm making up the frequency. And she asked, the group of myself and 5 other people, like, if you want, you can turn 1 or 2 bottles. And we were all like, yes. Like all we wanted to do was turn the little bottles. And I was like, this is so hilarious. Like I think about like myself during my day-to-day work, like sitting at a laptop, if someone were like, could I double click on that for you? Just we just want to be involved.
It's somehow different in a romantic way, It's
Right.
very romantic. And I think that while I love the romantic life of winemaking, I'm not sure that's my life. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
morning, you're, doing harvest and you're tending to these vines and you have to just wait for the weather and see what happens. And it's a lot of stress, but I'm really grateful for the work that they do. Um,
100%. Yes, absolutely. I think that you touched on something that I actually wanted to ask you about, which is I'd read an interview with an Oregon winemaker named Kate Nash, and she raved about your ability just to put people at ease during tastings. And I'm going to quote here. She wrote, "Quote, she makes everybody feel really comfortable, which is a really important trait when it comes to learning about wine," end quote. And I absolutely loved that. And I wonder, can you speak to why do you think that is an especially important thing for people who are learning about wine?
because, well, first, thanks, Kate. Um, I'm finding it still funny to be quoted, but I'm getting used to it. No, I'm kidding. I think that it's such a big subject when it comes to wine because there's so many places you could go just from the basic of red versus white, right? Like I didn't know certain things when I was starting. You can't just know that, you have to learn it. And I think I just don't forget that. And so I want people to enjoy the wine just as much as I do because I hear people like wanting that. They're like,
Mm.
how do you taste that? Or how do you smell that? Or what are you looking for? And that helps your experience if you are taught those things. And so I try to make sure that that's like the first sort of thing we sort of talk about on these tours because it makes the rest of their experience that much better, but then also they actually get to understand what and why they're enjoying it. And you don't see that in a lot of other beverage spaces um, because there's a little less of a story sometimes involved in that. Not to say that there's, you know, less work going into those other beverages. It's just different. It's just a very different specific thing. And I think people get really excited about learning and understanding what goes into the process because then it starts to also make you think about other things like other parts of farming and your food and how we consume things.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting point that you make, right? Like by the complexity of wine. And I agree. I don't think that it's better or worse than other beverages, but it's different, right? Like it is complicated. Um, I once read
Talking
that
about I smell gasoline and I smell like that's weird, right?
right, right, exactly. Like when friends and I both drink pineapple juice, one of us isn't like, I don't know, I'm really getting vanilla undertone, like, and, like
It's so
maybe,
complicated. It's like it's ridiculous. We make it very complicated. And I guess that's the thing is I try to take it back when I'm explaining all these things about the wine and yada yada yada. The question is, do you like it? Is it good? Because
right.
pineapple juice, not everybody likes pineapple juice.
Those people are crazy.
I agree. But it's a really complicated thing. It's much far more complicated than pineapple juice. However, the basic is the same. Do you like it? Do you want to drink more of this?
Right. I think that is a really important thing. It's really tough for folks who, for whatever reason, I think that wine has this, I don't know, this baggage attached to it where you're almost nervous to say, I don't like this because people are like, oh, well, that goes for $120 a bottle, right? And then you're like, I guess I like it. I think it can
Yeah.
put it puts this pressure on you, the taster, to be making like a value judgment as opposed to just a personal preference.
I was kind of different when I was purchasing wine at restaurants. I would have sales reps come in and I always kind of told them the same thing. I'm like, I really want to hear about these wines, but we're pressed for time. We're trying to get through the day. So how about we just talk about your weekend? And when I get to a wine that I want to know more about, then we'll start talking about the wine. Because you talking about the wine while I'm drinking it isn't going to change whether I like it or not.
Wow, that is revolutionary and shouldn't be, but that is so amazing. Like, I completely agree that you should just get to decide whether or not you like it. But unfortunately, I find that revolutionary. I think very often there can be this sense that someone is telling you how great it is, or they're just kind of like trying to impress you. They're like, this is by a woman winemaker who's breaking all
Yeah.
the rules. You're
Yeah.
like, okay.
Blah, blah, But I mean, I also it was a great way for me also to become friends with these amazing people who now, of course, all do different things, many of them winemakers themselves. And, it creates a connection. That's what we're trying to do, right? Like I have to sell something, I have to put something on my list and, that's part of my job. But I also should kind of enjoy this process. And also, isn't it pretty cool that our job is to sit here and talk about wine? Like that's pretty like I think that's cool.
I agree. I agree. It is. And like ultimately it's hospitality, right? Like at the end of the day, it's hospitality. And so I don't know. I think that's actually a nice takeaway for listeners, like in the future when we're at restaurants again, to feel free to engage the folks who are who either the sommeliers, the servers, whomever, to engage them personally and say like this is and isn't why I like this. I actually think that's a really good bit of advice for people.
Oh, thanks. Well, it made me feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. Are in general the people who sign up for trips with Dirty Radish are you'd mentioned like sometimes someone goes and their partner is really into wine and they're kind of just there because they love the historical aspect. Are they like generally pretty wine savvy? What is the split?
Definitely, they're more on the food and wine side. I mean, we have these long conversations in the very beginning where I'm like, listen, I'm going to need you to not try and keep up with the winemakers. I know you think you can do it. I'm going to need you to just listen. You're not going to be able to keep up with drinking with these winemakers, so don't try. That's the majority of my clients.
That is great advice. I mean, in travel, in life, that is great advice.
They're professionals at this. And when I say they will drink you under the table, I mean it. And it's not in a good way. But I mean, I definitely have more people who are into the food and wine. And now moving forward, definitely going in the sort of off season, if you will. Lyon is known, especially for Lyon trips. Lyon, the food in Lyon is very rich. And then you have this bright acidity and the Beaujolais wines, and then these amazing fruit forward, Rhone Valley wines at most bistros or little bouchons. And so to eat that food is better in the winter and the early spring. So that's when I do trips now. And it's a special kind of person who wants to come in the quote unquote off season
Mm-hmm.
and really get their hands dirty, if you will, because, it's kind of could be cold, and, but that's the whole thing, is bundling up and walking the streets and eating along the way. Just kind of helps the day.
Oh, I love that. I love an off-season travel myself. I absolutely love that. If someone is there and they've gotten on the plane and they are bundled and they are walking and eating and drinking, how do you help them get over any intimidation? The example I sometimes use is that when I was first working in wine, I was really self-conscious to swirl my glass. Like I felt like it looked pretentious. And then I was self-conscious to spit in public, right? Like you go through these sort of phases of what you do, how comfortable you are in wine. And now I'm happy to swirl and spit anywhere, don't get me wrong, but like it took a while for me to evolve in that direction of being like confident and comfortable. How do you help the guests, like the travelers? How do you help them sort of reach those places?
Well, I think first, when it comes to wine tasting, it's coming from the understanding that there isn't another food or beverage that we really consume where that is a normal thing to do, where you spit it out and you pour it out,
True.
right? That's weird. It's weird. And so you have to tell people that it's okay. They don't know. How would they know that? It's not listed on a wine bottle. It's not listed somewhere to understand that that's the culture of what we do. You learn by showing and sharing and explaining. And I think that's the hugest thing, is I know why I'm swirling the glass. They feel pretentious because they don't know why they're swirling it,
That's
right?
no, I think that's an excellent point. People just need context.
Yeah. What else I don't swirl milk in a glass and then smell it. I mean, maybe you smell it before you take it out of the fridge fully and make sure it's good. Other than that, you're not really contemplating your milk. You know what I mean?
Right, on the reg. Yeah, like maybe once in a while.
Correct. Maybe once in a while you're just checking in with that milk, but other than that, you're just going for the glass. But wine, no, we've got to have a whole pomp and circumstance about it, right? Because there's a ceremony. That's a part of the culture of wine, and it's a very singular thing. It's only in this one place that we really do these kinds of things. Of course, yes, and coffee and beer and and spirits and things like that, but it's different still, even with wine, right?
Right, right. And why is that? Why? Because I completely agree. Like I have definitely gone to, what do they call them? Cuppings, like coffee cuppings, when people are
Mhm.
like sniffing and swirling in a sort of similar way. But it is different in wine.
You have to have a tool to get into the wine. That's not the case with beer.
Right.
With beer,
That's a
you could
great
use the
point.
edge of a table to open that bottle if you had to, or it came in a convenient can. Liquor, what am I using to get into a bottle of liquor? My hand. That's it.
Mhm.
But wine, I have to have a whole tool. It's a thing. Of course it's different. We just did some savoring last night, and I couldn't believe it again. More people who had never savored a bottle. I mean, that's weird to me, but it's not weird to them. Why would I do that?
Right, right. I love the idea that there's a literal barrier to entry. You know?
We're like, can you though? Like, do you know how to get into this? I don't know if you can even have it. First, we got to figure out how to do this. Like, what?
Right, right. No, it's true. I had a friend who he enjoys wine, but he's not someone who self-identifies as like a wine drinker. And he was like, I feel like they make it deliberately difficult. And actually, first, I can't wait to tell him about the fact that like there is a key you need, an actual tool you need to get into it. But while I would say it isn't deliberately difficult, I do think it's difficult. Like I do think it is more difficult for me to wrap my mind around the classifications and the certifications in wine than in something like beer.
Same. I try to listen to people talk about beer or other things, sports, politics, history. People get so in depth about stuff that I'm like, how do you know all that information? And they're like, what's what I'm passionate about? I'm like, oh, right. So when I'm talking about wine, that's the same. It's my passion. So I'm talking about it in a way that other people probably don't understand. It's education, education is the basis of what we would call a democratic society. But I mean, education is where it leads you to the thing that you want to learn more about. And then you learn more about it, and then you get to experience it, hopefully in that way. But
Mm-hmm. You also, you mentioned the word in a democratic society, and that is something that has kind of been like, I don't know, batting around my head since I was thinking about this podcast, which is how can we make wine more democratic? How can we make the culture and the product more accessible to more people?
well, I think for me, I want to take the word democratic out of it because it doesn't really make sense when it comes to wine in the sense of, again, education is part of what makes things democratic. But like, this is more than that. It's passion, it's experience, it's all these other things. And again, back to the not all wines are created equally. And so, how you come to be in wine or what you choose to do in wine is going to be different. And that should be okay, right? That should just be okay. Like, we don't get on people if they like cheddar.
Mm-hmm.
But we do
Mm-hmm.
like, you really like that particular wine? Oh, I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so we have to, as a culture, like open the door for other people to be able to come into those spaces. And that again goes back to the hands that touch the product from start to finish. So how does this one bottle get here and who made it? Who made it? And then that's going to correlate with also who drinks it in some ways, right? But everything comes back to this culture, which is customs and behaviors and attitudes towards something. And so when you haven't had people in certain spaces making those wines, why would it have trickled into those cultures? Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a really great point. Yeah, like where would that access point be?
We're still saying female winemaker, woman owned winemaker, black owned winemaker. So if we're still saying those things, that means it's because there's a need to highlight it because there aren't that many. We don't say white male winemaker, it's just assumed. So that's
Right.
a
Right.
culture, correct? That is a culture. As soon as other people are able to make wine, of course, the culture is going to change and the access will change because it's available and open in other cultures. The culture of wine is available in other cultures. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does though. No, I think you really hit the nail on the head, right? When we say things like black female winemaker, women in wine, all of this, what it does is point out that this is like an aberration from some kind of norm, right? And like that's weighty. That's a weighty message in those words.
Right. And so it's hard to question how do you make wine more accessible and democratic and all these things and not look at how wine is made and where it comes from and who's been in those spaces to make wine, right? A lot of this comes to, like, again, agriculture. So who owns the land to make those wines? You have to think about those things before you can be like, why don't more people in America drink wine? Well, I mean, there's a whole reason. And again, culture. You're seeing in kitchens now, it's completely normal to have a wine fridge built into the kitchen. That wasn't the case on TV when I was growing up in the 90s, but now you see on Modern Family and Blackish, the moms are drinking wine middle of the day. Wine fridge, we're pulling a bottle. It's a new thing to have here. And it's not to say that that's not the case kind of globally, but it's definitely different here, right? I mean, that's how I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a great call. You're so right. When I was growing up, I never saw sitcom moms or dads or anyone really. The only time people were drinking was like when they were getting drunk. Like there was not casual wine consumption by like the mom on blood, the equivalent of the mom on. That's actually a really great call. Yeah, like just seeing like the fridges being added to if someone's making a TV set of like a nice family kitchen. That's a great point.
So culturally, it is already shifting, and that's because of a lot of reasons. But yes, you're definitely seeing more people in different spaces, whether that's they are the people who are making the wine, they're the people who are importing the wine, they're the people who are distributing the wine, sales reps talking about it, who's managing the restaurant that's buying the wine. Like it goes down the whole line. And so again, who are the hands that are touching the wine from start to finish is all a part of how it's going to be inserted into any one given culture. Because you're talking about the culture of wine kind of bleeding in or blending in with other cultures. So it's going to look different, but it's still unified in that it's the wine culture that we're talking about.
Right, right, absolutely. And even just I think about it a lot when I say things like US culture. Like the US is enormous. There's so many of us. I mean, if our extremely stratified politics are any inclination, we feel very differently. And so I think it's an interesting thing to even try to, as you said, these are big questions. Like we're trying to zero in on one thing from a cultural perspective, and we're more than one POV.
hmm And wine, unfortunately, isn't classless. It's not
Mhm.
without that because there are different price points. And that's just a part of the nature of wine, but we still haven't quite figured that out in the sense of we're still in this place of shaming the lower end wines, or if someone likes somebody or something that's, we're definitely a little elitist on this end, right? When we talk about wine, and that's why, like, people make fun of me because I love the show Frasier. Fine.
No shame in loving Frasier. This is a safe space.
Maybe it's because you just don't get the jokes because we're about wine.
No, it's funny. I do think it is very funny. Frasier had a really strong impact on me as well as being like, these are the people who know about wine. It's these two guys.
But also, my personal note, my mother loves that show. And so I remember watching it when it was coming up or when it was on. And I didn't quite get the humor, but of course I get it more so now, But that's the thing is, again, it's a culture that shows definitely, well, it's humorous. You know the joke was funny, but you don't necessarily know why the joke was funny.
Right.
Now you can be like, I totally get that Bordeaux reference. Why isn't that normal?
Right, right. And you know what? Maybe it will be, right? Like maybe in 10 years from now, I look at the way that I see wine as having the the various ways that wine intersects with US cultures. I see it as really evolving in the past 10 years. I think rosé had a lot to do with it. I see it sort of shifting. And so I wonder if 10 years from now, will everyone be watching reruns of Frasier on whatever streaming networks, whatever we've moved to past streaming networks, will everyone be watching them and getting these Bordeaux references?
I'm looking forward to the day when they revise it as Black Frasier, which is something I'm just really excited about. I think there are talks of that happening, and I'm very excited about that. But back to the rosé as well. Ask like your mom or someone like people weren't drinking rosé, and now it's rosé all day, frosé, brosé. Like wine is fashion as well. It's a fad. Things come in and out of fashion all the time. So everything's going to come around once again, but also as it comes around and these fads change, it's going to bring in new people into that again, this wine culture that we're expanding all the time because we're changing the way that things happen.
Right, right. No, that's actually, I think that's super interesting. And also, I would love to watch Black Frasier when it comes out. Uh, like Idris Elba, who's going to be Black? I'm curious who the cast will be.
I don't know. I feel like Tracy Ellis Ross is involved, but don't quote me on that. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I'm into it. I'm ready. But no, I really do thank you because I think you've offered a lot of really good perspectives here on just how big this conversation is, right? Like just how sort of far-reaching these both the way that wine is perceived and consumed is.
Right. I mean, it's a big conversation. I'm very happy that we're having these kinds of conversations, but we're working to create this sort of two things, an equity in wine spaces, which means, like I said, like kind of moving and shifting things, but then also how do you bring people into this culture of wine, which requires education. It really does, to be able to enjoy it in the way that you best can. I think that kind of goes for everything, right? Like how your food is grown, how your whatever is made. Like,
Right, right. And it's kind of what you were saying at the beginning of our conversation about the person who she wanted to drink the wine that she'd had a hand in making. And so if you know a lot, you don't have to be actually the one physically making it, but if you know a lot about the way your wine is made, or as you said, there's greater equity in the folks who are making the wine, who are physically doing the work, and the way it is consumed and perceived. That's a totally different conversation.
yeah, I think it's like knowing something or having that education and that experience. It's kind of like driving. Like I know how to drive, but I don't know how a car really works. But I'm sure that someone who really knows and understands how a car moves and shifts and all of those things probably enjoys driving way more than I do. You know what I mean?
That's an excellent parallel. Yeah, they are like thinking about what the ways that the gears are shifting when I'm just like, I don't know, I'm trying to go to the store.
Yeah. So, and like I have a box. My car is an old box, but um, when I'm drinking a wine and I'm like, oh, these are biodiversity grapes, and they were picked in this cool climate. Like you're just like going down this list. It's enjoyable, right? It's more enjoyable.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Siobhan, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful to talk to you just about I don't know, kind of about the diversity of experiences we can have with wine in the US. Like that's almost where I see this as being, and just, I don't know, on the ways that the culture can change.
Yeah, I mean, the wine culture will change. It has to. It will, and it's not going to change for the worse, I don't think. I think that's kind of what everybody's afraid of when they think of change. They're like, oh, well, it's going to get bad. No, it might be good. See what happens.
Need a break from the news? We're very excited to tell you about an all-new podcast from our partner site, Thirsty Nest, the first wine and spirits registry for the modern couple. This podcast is called Can I Buy You a Drink? And on it, founder Jackie Strum will interview wine and wedding industry up-and-comers about their very own meet-cute stories and their path to finding the one. It's a dreamy break from all the scary headlines that will warm your cold, cold heart. So check out Can I Buy You a Drink? From the Thirsty Nest team on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast platform you prefer.
I'm speaking with Zidanelia Arcidiacono, a winemaker in Sonoma, California. Born in Texas and raised in Argentina, she is now the Pinot Noir winemaker at Sonoma Cutrer. She's speaking with Wine Enthusiast in the middle of Harvest Week, a fact for which I am extremely grateful. Zidanelia, thank you so much for making the time today.
Sure, Emily, no problem.
And I'm so excited that we get to chat today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, namely why wine can feel so exclusive. And so, because you grew up in Argentina and work in the US, I wonder if you can speak a little bit to the sort of different ways geographies and cultures play into how people consume and think about wine. Do you see differences between the way folks perceive wine in Argentina versus the US?
I think so. I mean, I don't like to generalize and answer for everyone in Argentina or everyone in the US. Of course, there's exceptions. But I can talk about the my own experience and what I was exposed to. So in Argentina, we enjoy a glass of wine with each meal. I grew up in a Italian family, so there was wine every time during lunchtime and many times during dinner. So it was very natural. We didn't think too much about it. It was just there. It's what adults do. But here in the US, it was slightly different. I'm not sure if it's maybe because of the fast pace that we live in, that we always tend to wait for that like specific time and occasion. And we get so worried about making sure we pick the right wine that goes perfectly with the meal. And we ended up just forgetting to just enjoy.
That is such a great point. I once interviewed a champagne maker, and he was like, the US loves buying champagne, but I don't talk to people who drink a lot of it. And I was like, that's actually a really excellent point. People are so nervous because, especially with bubbles, right? Like you open them and you're like, I got it. This is going to expire. Like I got a
Yeah.
timetable on this. No, that's a really great point. There's this, I don't know. And I think you also, you raised a really smart perspective, which is like, we're speaking in generalities here. Argentina is enormous. The US is enormous. My partner is also a native Texan. And in my experience, Texans love to tell me how the state is the same size as France.
Yeah.
This is something I've heard in Texas like a billion times. And I actually think it's a useful comparison point, though, when we're talking about wine culture, because the US is like there's a lot of different attitudes that we're sort of trying to navigate in wine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, and it's a country that there are so many cultures there. It's so rich as well. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully we all learn from each other and we get to try more wine. So, become a little more flexible and maybe take on other cultures and what they think about wine and wine consumption.
Absolutely. To that end, you started some community programs at Sonoma Couture. Can you tell me more about those?
Well, at Sonoma Couture, we have multiple different groups, and I'm extremely curious. I always want to know what's going on. So pretty much, I joined most of the groups. So we have community relation groups. We have Grow, which is to help grow women. Copa, which really brings awareness to the Latino and the Hispanic community and all our different heritage. So, but the one that I'm the most proud of because I have the joy to co-lead is SET. So SET is a sustainability team at Cinema Couture, and this is the time where we need to be very aware of sustainability, our environment. We think it's
Mhm.
extremely important. Um, so, what we do is we bring out awareness to our leaders as well as education to all the employees about sustainability and came up with ways that we can improve the process, make it more sustainable in all things we do. So, we go from trying to find zero waste ideas also to conserve water, which is such a precious resource here, mostly in California, and also energy conservation. And our team, it's formed by people from all the different areas. So we have people from admin, finance, people from the kitchen, people from landscape, people from the vineyards, people from production. So we are a very rich team where we can actually share our ideas all across the company. And our leaders were fortunate that they hear us and they are able to make changes.
That is incredible. And I love what you said about, looking at the sustainability issues in wine. What it reminds us is that wine is above all an agricultural product. Again, caught up in this sort of exclusivity reputation that can surround it in the US. I think a lot of folks forget that it is agricultural. You are growing and cultivating grapes.
Yes.
There's a lot that you're doing with those, but like it is very much an agricultural business.
It is 100%, and many times we forget. And mostly in the winemaking side and winemakers, I think we have this dual personality sometimes because wine can be very glamorous, or people make it very glamorous. And I mean, if you come and see me during harvest, it's a completely different picture. So I recently was part of like some photo shoots and things, and I'm like I'm amazed of like how do I look when I'm not in harvest and versus how I look during harvest because I'm all dirty and running outside, and it's what it is. We're out in the country, nearby the vineyards, so it's wine.
Right. No, I love that. It's true. I feel like there is sometimes this perception that sort of what you were saying about it needing to be the right moment to open that bottle. There's also this idea that it is so precious. And like, look, I work in wine. Like I do think it's amazing.
Yeah.
But like it is also something like as precious as it is, it's an everyday your everyday is spent literally getting your hands dirty, right? And like I
Mhm.
think that is a really important distinction. Well, not every day, forgive me, during harvest. But I do, I'm not saying you're like in the mud all day, every day. But no,
Almost
I
every
do
day.
I think that is an important thing also when we want to kind of take wine is super cool, super layered and nuanced, but it doesn't need to be just veiled in mystique, right? Like it is also this product that you make in a winery in fields, and it is something that grows. I think that is it's a really nice sort of visceral connection that consumers could have with it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, many times we just forget that again, I always like to say it's just wine, so don't be afraid, it's we need to make it more welcoming. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What can we do? This is let's be let's be
Yeah.
instructive. What can we do to make wine? This is to me like the heart of the issue is to make it more welcoming and inclusive. How could we do that?
So I don't think I have like the perfect answer to that, but I really don't understand why. When I came here, I've learned and I was extremely excited about craft beers. And I think nobody thinks that you need to be a brewer to be able to drink beers. I don't think when you drink a cocktail or any other drink, you need to be a master distiller or a mixologist to be able to enjoy it. So I'm not sure why with wine we feel like we need a degree in winemaking or viticulture to really understand and appreciate wine. So yeah, many times I get the question of but how you do to distinguish this aromas from those and this flavors from this other flavors? And I keep telling people it's just practice and not being afraid of trying new things. There's even wines that I don't enjoy. They're not of my personal palate. That doesn't mean they're bad. They're just they're not for me. But that's why there's so many wines out in the market. So I don't let that stop me from enjoying wine and from exploring and being able to enjoy more options.
Mhm, mhm. Exactly, yeah, like it's this idea that it needs to be perfect, and if I had one oaked Chardonnay, that doesn't mean I've had every oaked Chardonnay. It
Hmm.
certainly doesn't mean I've had every Chardonnay, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I think that there can be a little bit of that, and, this idea that if you didn't love one, like, that's it, it's over,
Yes.
category over. And maybe that is accessibility, is what is price point part of it. Wine is more expensive at the entry level than other beverages. I mean, I live in New York where cocktails are crazy pricey, but
Hmm. Yes.
you can get a good spirit in a shop and make them yourself. Wine does start at a higher price point. I think about it sometimes where like the best craft beers in the world are going to cost me about $30, whereas the best wines in the world I will never probably in this lifetime afford. One
Yeah.
can, but yeah, do you think that price point? How does that play into it?
I think so, but I've also tried. I have tried. Wines are not so expensive that really feel the spot for me. So I'm
Mhm.
always like hunting for those great deals. And
Mhm.
well, I have an advantage. I actually can all the wines that get bottled. So we do a lot of tests during the bottling line, and some of them just get tested. So at the end of the day, I may be able to grab that bottle and take it with me. So I have great wine for not much.
That is
So,
fantastic.
but yeah, I think sometimes you have to allow yourself to try wines that maybe are not too expensive and find those gems. There's varieties that are not too expensive and you might be able to like them. So,
Mm,
not always think that because it's extremely expensive is going to be the best wine. You may not like it. You may not be um, there, may not um, really be for your palate. So don't wait for those extremely expensive wines to really enjoy wine. Just go out and
mhm.
try what you can afford.
That's such great advice. Someone once told me, a wine instructor once told me that he thinks that Portuguese whites are a value category.
Mhm.
And I think about that all the time when I'm in wine shops where I'm like, value category, just in
Yeah.
terms of bang for buck, you can get some really good ones. Where do you think are like great values in wine? For those of us who don't have access to that bottling line, which sounds amazing, where do you think are like good values to look for?
I mean, if always try to also like you can buy local or you can
Mm,
even buy from other countries. You may have to do a little research, but
mhm,
always know that there's people that you can ask for recommendations on wines. Many wine stewards, many sommeliers in restaurants, they may know about these gems. And when you ask them, actually, they are extremely excited to share all this knowledge with you. So don't be afraid of asking people if you don't know. I mean, you can certainly go ahead and try all the wines possible until you nail it, or you can you can just go ahead and start asking people that actually are able to be more exposed to wines in a daily basis. So they
mhm,
may recommend you really good gems and at not too much in a very lower price point. So yeah,
mhm.
go for it. Ask for recommendations. I was fortunate to be last year. I went to Portugal, so yes, I agree with that. Wines from Portugal are really easy to drink, very fresh, very crisp, and I enjoy them very much.
Ah, love it. No, and I think you raise such a great point, which is that sort of like Texans who want to tell you about the France thing, like people in wine are dying to talk about wine. And unfortunately, like, sure, are there some snobs out there? There are, but there kind of are in anything, like you hang out with a baseball fan, and sometimes if you're
Yeah.
not well versed in baseball, you can quickly lose the narrative. But I think that that happens in wine sometimes, but it doesn't have to be intimidating. I think you really did raise such a great point, which is that people want to talk, they want to tell you, but people in wine want to talk about wine.
Yes, yes. And I think it's also in us to just let people know that, I mean, just because because you study wine and you're exposed to wine, not everyone needs to know everything. So just share it and make them feel welcome, that share your knowledge with others. Don't make them feel like, oh, you don't know anything. So I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to make good recommendations because you don't know. That's why they're asking. And if you're on the other side, the side that are just getting into wine, don't be afraid if you get a bad answer. It's just, that's just one single person or answer. Just
Mhm.
go ahead and find someone else. Just keep your journey.
Right, right. Find someone else is great advice for wine and life, I think,
Yeah.
Um, like it speaks to that we are all evolving. And so like if the person you talk to today isn't a match for where you're at in your wine journey, you could
Hmm.
talk to someone else tomorrow. I think that is excellent advice.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like many times
Um,
even if I talk to people, they may be starting in their journey of just enjoying wine, and I may not have the same taste, but hey, we don't have to. We don't have to. Um, so I respect what you like, and I love what I like. So it again, being respectful with others' decisions is extremely important.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, there's no right taste.
No.
You know, I was speaking about champagne earlier, and a lot of folks in the wine community in New York, I'm not going to say fetishize champagne, but really like it,
Yeah.
like it in a very specific way. And look, I also am a fan, but I it can also be alienating, because that tells someone like, oh, well, like I really love cava or I really like prosecco. You know, like, those
Hmm.
folks aren't wrong. It's good to like what you like. You know, at the end of the day, right? You got
Yeah,
to drink it.
totally. I mean, I'm just happy people is getting into wine. They're drinking wine and having a great experience with it. So then you can actually decide, well, maybe I want to drink something different. Maybe I want to advance and know a little bit more. Or no, I'm good here. So I'm all for people, to me it's just good that you decided to start drinking wine and enjoying it. That's good enough for me.
I love it. Agree 100%. No, thank you so much. This has been so lovely to speak to you. I really hope that everyone who's listening hears a winemaker telling them, drink what you like, and is like, oh, yeah, I can do exactly that, right?
Right?
It is that easy. Yeah, I love that.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wine Enthusiast podcast. These conversations make one thing abundantly clear. There are a lot of people working in wine who are eager to share their enthusiasm and expertise. Wine doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive or culturally exclusive. There's so much to cover in wine, and the more voices we can add to that dialogue, the better. Subscribe to the Wine Enthusiast podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you find podcasts. If you liked today's episode, we'd love to read your review and hear what you think. And hey, why not tell your wine-loving friends to check us out too? You can also drop us a line at podcast@winemag.com. For more wine reviews, recipes, guides, deep dives, and stories, visit Wine Enthusiast online at winemag.com and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Wine Enthusiast. You can also read more about all of our 40 Under 40 Tastemakers of 2020 online or by picking up a copy of the October issue, out now. The Wine Enthusiast podcast is produced by Lauren Buzzio and Jenny Groza. Until next episode, cheers.